Awareness Month. Uh, you know, we did, so October is, it was designated as a cybersecurity awareness month, I think a few years back. And everything that's happening in the cyberspace, AI, I think in every month should be a cybersecurity awareness month, because if you're not thinking about this, then, it can affect our bottom line as a business, as entrepreneurs, and as even in personal finances. So we have to be uh, vigilant of what's happening. Uh, Today we have Jacob Blackstein. Jacob did a cybersecurity data protection 1.0 version webinar back in May, and we're so glad he's back to follow up that webinar with a 2.0 version. There might still be some overlaps, but we're glad to have him on board to be the speaker and help us out understand some of the things that's happening in the cybersecurity space. You know, and I was just telling him earlier, he is still working with he is part of the SBDC network in Delaware. He is one of the leads for our National Association's cybersecurity initiative called North Star. And he recently joined Jack Henry, a financial technology company, as a senior specialist. So we're all happy that, and we're very appreciative of Jacob's time, because he could have told us, I can't do this, but he's here. And without any further ado, I think people are going to be coming in as we speak. We have few people from our team, SBDC. I will quickly, do a quick overview at the end if we still have some time. Otherwise, Jacob, please take it, and thank you so much again.
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone, and welcome. So I worked for the last 6 years as a Delaware SBDC advisor, where I was the digital solutions manager, and I still kind of wear that hat. And in the meantime, before we transition to a newer employee. But currently, I have transitioned into a role at Jack Henry, which is a financial services firm that handles a lot of the transactions that community banks and local banks use as backends. So I'm still in a small business supporting role. It's just I now focus on security trainings for our large employee base versus small business base. But with that being said, let me share my screen so we can dive into the slide deck. Share the screen and share it. All right. So we talked last time about cybersecurity and kind of what we were seeing in the industries, as well as what you can do as small businesses to protect yourself. This slide deck, I wanted to reiterate some of the points that we had talked about last time, but also make it that if this is your first time joining us and you didn't have a chance to join us last time, that you still get some fundamental things that you're not completely lost. So with that, spring into cybersecurity and data protection awareness is kind of what we're talking about. And what we're talking about today is understanding cyber threats and making sure that we are aware of the threats that exist to our small businesses. It is a much different picture being in a corporate environment versus a small business environment. Being in a small business environment for the last 6 years and now being here for the last 6 months, it is slightly different. However, it doesn't mean that you can't use the same tools and resources that we use here for your small business. We're also going to talk about how we can develop a cybersecurity plan of action. I know plans are very important to small businesses, business plans and things like that. So having a cybersecurity plan, we don't mean that you have to have a separate documentation for developing a cybersecurity plan, but you can add it into your business plan. What are you going to be introducing in your business, your marketing software, your banking software, all of that just needs a little plan on how you're going to be securing that. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about some effective security measures that you as small businesses can implement. I'm not talking things that you're going to need super sophisticated systems to do. If you're a larger organization and you have the funds to spend on something like that super sophisticated, that's great. But most small businesses are mom and pop shops, and you don't have that type of thing. So there's already built-in security mechanisms that are on your PCs or your Macs that we can turn on to make yourself more secure. So this presentation kind of goes and walks through the iterations and the variations of things that you can turn on natively to your different devices that don't really cost you anything to do. And then training employees and meeting requirements. So some of you might not have employees. Maybe it's just you. So it's more focused on training you than it is training the employee. But some of you might have some employees. Either they use their own computer to do a lot of the business stuff for you, or they're using a computer or an iPad or a phone or whatever it is that you gave them to do and transact business for you. And what we need to do in order to control how employees are using those types of devices. So just real quick on common threats to small businesses. Data breaches, obviously, one of the largest things that we see for small businesses is usually one of these four that I'm going to talk about leads to a data breach. A data breach is an actual event that happens when a bad actor gets into your system and does something or takes something that they're not supposed to. There is a fine line, and I believe we talked about it last time. There is a difference between a data breach and a data incident. All data breaches happen from data incidents, but not all data incidents turn into data breaches. And what that means is we tend to like to use the term data incident versus a data breach when we don't know exactly what happened, because data incident means that something happened, but we don't know if information was taken. We don't know the severity of it. We just know that somebody sent a file that they shouldn't have, or someone gained access to something they shouldn't. And usually that, excuse me, data incidences can be malicious and or non-malicious. And so we talk about the difference between the two of them. In malicious, meaning an attacker actually got into the system and did something, or non-malicious, which is maybe an employee accidentally sent the wrong invoice to a client, or maybe they accidentally shared some information to somebody they shouldn't have. And while that is not a data breach and that isn't a cause for concern, that is technically considered a data incident because data got, or information got into the hands that it shouldn't. So that's why we use those things. But data breaches is a common threat to small businesses, because what happens if someone gains access to your client list, to your email servers, to your business clientele, anything like that. And then phishing attacks, which I think all of us are very much aware of what those are today. It was not a problem when we didn't have email, but now we have email, and it's a part of our life. And phishing attacks is something that is still today the most used form of what we call attack vectors to get into people's systems to get data. So phishing attacks is still the most common. It is not going away, unfortunately, because it's just getting more sophisticated as AI gets introduced and all of these different things. Then we have malware and ransomware. So they all are kind of one and the same. It's basically viruses that get on your system that either encrypt your data and making them unusable, or they are slowing down your computer, or they're sending your data somewhere it's not supposed to, or it is providing you with a bunch of pop-ups and being annoying, and or there's what we call keyloggers, which is recording every time you type on a keyboard. There are different forms of viruses and malware and ransomware and all of that. But that is the whole purpose of phishing attacks is to get you to download or install or provide them content that they can use, basically malware and ransomware, to steal information. Then we talk about insider threats. This is something we actually see that we're actually training a lot on here. And that's mainly because insider threats don't always have to be malicious or bad. Um, we used to consider when I was a digital forensics investigator, insider threats. We had subdivisions of insider threats. You had bad actors, which is were doing things inside your company maliciously, or you had insider threats that weren't doing things maliciously. They just didn't have the proper training to know what a phishing link was, or didn't have the proper know how to do certain things, and they were accidentally providing information or clicking links that they shouldn't have. And that is considered an insider threat because it's an employee or yourself doing it to your organization. It's just not malicious. And then we have social engineering, which social engineering is kind of the bubble we use to describe the context of a bad actor trying to gain your trust and manipulate you in order to provide them with either password information, login information, data, or really anything. So that's your not only just phishing, but that is vishing, which is phone messages that you get, voicemails, and things like that, text messages that you get. Those are all forms of social engineering, which is trying to play on the human heartstring, which humans are the weakest link to any security protocols and procedures. So those are the common threats that we see. So the top 4 cybersecurity topics that we're going to cover today to help combat some of those threats are encryption, password management, two-factor authentication, and threat detection. So encryption is basically making sure that all of the data that is on any of our devices is only readable by us. So it is basically jumbled up so that way only us who have the password or the system or the computer that originally generated the jumbled up data can read it. Password management is we tell you that you need a unique username and password to every user account that exists. That was at the early on when cybersecurity was first becoming a thing. Then we realized that usernames aren't unique anymore because most people require you just use your email address as your username. So then that meant that really the only thing that was protecting us was the password. And then that became an issue where if we're telling you to have a unique password for all of our accounts, in today's age, everyone requires you to have an account, whether you're online shopping, whether you're banking, whether you are doing really anything. So now we require you to have probably 50 to 100 different passwords in order to make your life easier. You tended to just create one password for everything, which is a huge security flaw. So we created password management or software to help combat that. Two-factor authentication, that's that code that you get on your when you log into your bank from a text message. That's the authenticator apps that you use that give you that 6-digit code that auto-generates. It's Face ID, it is fingerprint readers, it's all of those things that once you log in, you then verify that login with something else. And then threat detection. So threat detection is your antiviruses, your anti-malware, your different softwares that you can use downloaded on your systems to help protect yourself. So, oh, and as I'm going through this, feel free to stop me, ask questions. I have a lot of information to talk about, and I can talk for hours on any general topic. However, I don't really love to just talk. So if there's any questions you have specific to your business, or you can put them in the chat, and I'll try to read the chat as they come in, because I have the chat window open as well. So there we'll have that. So we already kind of talked about what data encryption is, and it's basically, like I said, when we take every piece of data that's on a computer or in the cloud or whatever, and we jumble it up so that way only myself, whoever originally jumbled up the data, has the password or the key to read that data once it's jumbled up. All right. So this gets a little more technical than I typically go with small businesses, but I do want to just make you aware that there are different types of encryptions that exist that are out there. So we have what we call full disk, whole disk encryption. And that's when you jumble up the entire hard drive that is in your computers or your mobile devices or your tablets. So that's basically everything that we do on that computer, everything is encrypted, or everything we do on that tablet is encrypted. And that's why we call it full disk or whole disk encryption. Then we have file level encryption, which file level encryption doesn't encrypt everything, system files and everything on your device. It only encrypts the files you want on the device to be encrypted. So if you have a very specific Excel document or Word document that has a bunch of stuff that is personal identifiable information, PII, in it, and you just want that file to be encrypted, you use file level encryption to jumble up just that file. And then transport layer encryption, that's the communication between you and the outside world, or you and the internet, or you in really anything that exists on the internet. You want to make sure that the tunnel that is created between you and Amazon.com is encrypted. So anyone who is also on Amazon.com, or anyone that's also on your Wi-Fi or on public Wi-Fi, can't easily intercept that tunnel and read what you're doing. And then we have email encryption. This is a little less important to small businesses, mainly because if you use Outlook, Microsoft Office, or Gmail, Google email, most of those emails are encrypted by default. Email encryption is typically by a third party, encrypted by default. So we tend to not worry too much about that. This is more or less if you're using your own email server, or you're trying to save money and not use like an email address from Google or Microsoft. So you go for a third party, and that's where we get a little tricky with that. Hardware based encryption. So this one is relatively new. So ever since we ended up getting Windows 11, most PCs require what we call a TPM chip, which is a physical piece of computer component that is located in our computers that handles encryption. So if you ever have a computer that cannot upgrade to Windows 11 because it's missing what we call a TPM chip, that is the hardware-based encryption. And Windows 11 was built around security. And with that being said, most devices prior to Windows 11 weren't shipped with this TPM chip that handled all of that encryption. And Mac devices were slightly different. Macs have their own version of hardware-based encryption, but that's what we're talking about. It's an actual physical device that lives inside the computer that handles most of the encryption. It's better and stronger and faster. And then cloud encryption. This is when we're using OneDrive or Google Drive or Dropbox or whatever it might be. Inherently, they are some form of encrypted, but they are not always as secure, and not every online cloud service provider is created equal as far as encryption goes. So if you're dealing like a doctor's office or something like that, most of those aren't HIPAA compliant. They're only specific. Like I think Dropbox has a very specific version of itself that is HIPAA compliant. Like Google, you can't just open a doctor's office and use Google Drive or OneDrive to start sharing information. It is very specific cloud encryption algorithms that exist to be HIPAA compliant. So I just wanted to show some examples of encryption. Both Windows and Mac have built-in versions of encryption. Windows has what we call whole disk encryption. So this is the one where it encrypts everything on the device. This is, it's called BitLocker. BitLocker is, well, most people that I know in the small businesses or organizations use BitLocker to protect themselves. And BitLocker is native to Windows. I have realized that it might only be in the Pro version. Windows Home, I don't think has it. So if you just went and bought a Windows PC from like Best Buy or something of that, you may have to upgrade from Windows Home Windows 11 Home to Windows 11 Pro or Enterprise in order to get BitLocker included. But usually that's a one-time purchase, and depending on what Windows you have, it's anywhere between I've seen it as low as $50 to $150. Again, depends on if you already have Windows or you have to buy it completely. But it's as simple as clicking that button that says turn on BitLocker, and it then requires you to enter in a password. So it encrypts everything off of a password. You enter in that password, and then it starts to encrypt everything that's on that computer, meaning that if that computer is ever lost or stolen, they need your unique password in order to unlock the entire drive. What's the difference between a BitLocker password and just having a password on your generalized, login account? That statement is everything. So when I was a forensics investigator, we had special tools that actually ripped out hard drives from their physical computers, hooked them up to machines, and if they were not BitLocker encrypted or whole disk encrypted with a different information, regardless if you had a password or not on your user account, we could still see your files and folders and everything. So BitLocker would not give us that ability. We could rip out the hard drive, plug it into one of our machines, try to see it, and we wouldn't. So that's what BitLocker does, and that's the difference between it. Problem with BitLocker is if you ever forget your recovery key or your password, it is done. It is any files on that system will no longer be available to you. That is, it's impossible to, well, I can't say impossible because cybersecurity is a very interesting realm, and everything we think is impossible ends up being possible at some point. But BitLocker usually cannot be cracked. So if you forget your username, forget your password, that computer is now done. You would have to completely wipe the entire machine and start from scratch in order to get back some information or get back to even using Windows on it. Then we have Mac OS. So Mac OS, they have their version, which is called File Vault. This works on all of their devices, regardless of what operating system you have. So you don't have to have Windows Pro versus Windows Home or anything like that. Mac OS, if you have Mac OS on a device, you have the ability to turn on File Vault. It does the same kind of thing that BitLocker does. User interface is a little bit easier, so you don't have to have a different password. So your login password for Mac OSs can be the same as your FileVault password, whereas BitLocker, you would log into your computer using a BitLocker password, and then you would have to log into your computer again with your actual password to your user account. Mac OS doesn't have that. It's all one. So from a user's experience, it's a little easier, but those are two different forms of encryption depending on the operating system that you have. And then here's some resources for you as far as encryption resources. Like I mentioned, FileVault and BitLocker are full disk encryption. There are some file level encryptions out there like VeraCrypt in encrypting file systems, which is EFS, which is Windows based, which most people don't necessarily use, or if they use it, they use some form of it. VeraCrypt is a file level encryption that I've heard is much better. We used to use it as investigators in order to lock some of our files. So that's a third-party tool that is downloaded on either your Mac device or your Windows device, and it allows us to just encrypt a specific file. So like if you have sensitive information in an Excel document that has a bunch of PII information, we would use VeraCrypt to encrypt the actual file itself, and then we could put it out on OneDrive or Google Drive or wherever we were hosting it on a cloud device, and it would be encrypted. So if anyone got a hold of that file, they would need either a VeraCrypt software in order to decode it, or they would need some type of username and password in order to decode it. And then hardware-based, like I mentioned, your TPM chip, which lives inside Windows. Apple Silicon has its own version of the TPM chip. So TPM chips are specific to PCs. Apple Silicon is obviously specific to Apple. We also have USB devices that have security built in. So you can buy USB devices that have number pads on them, It's all built in. So when you plug in your USB device, you enter in a code, it unlocks the device. You're able to then put information on it. And then when you unplug it, it locks it with your code again. So those are pretty cool. And then self-encrypting drives. Self-encrypting drives are basically just hard drives that every time a file gets written to the hard drive, it's automatically encrypted. And you need special keys in order to unlock. So these are just, we'll provide you all the slides. These all have links to them. You can go out and find out more information, all of them. So then we transition into passwords and why password management works and matters. So the whole reason why we have you require unique passwords is because passwords are our first line of defense. It protects against unauthorized access. It defends against what we call brute force attacks, which brute force attacks are basically me taking a computer system and trying to randomly guess every iteration of a password or iterations of passwords in order to then ultimately, hopefully, guess your password. We have compliance requirements. So if you work in HIPAA, you have to have certain password management codes. If you have any European, anyone that is part of the EU client that you do business with, they require to be GDPR compliant, which is a whole nother regulation stuff that we could talk about at a different time. But if you do anything with outside of the country, especially the EU, you have GDPR. If you do if you do anything with any other state, typically they all have their own data privacy requirements. And so if you're ever dealing with anyone that you do business with outside your state, which is most of us, you have all of those other state requirements and compliance requirements. And then reputation protection. So I know passwords, we all at this point know probably how to create strong and secure passwords, or at least we know that we should have strong and secure passwords and how to create them. We just might not. So still today, the most commonly used passwords are these 4 passwords: 123456, admin, 12345678, and password. These are still in use today and are still still the 4 most common passwords used. We are currently recommending at least 12 character passwords. Length typically trumps complexity. However, with faster computers and the faster we are at cracking codes, the longer we'll need to get. Complexity, so upper and lowercase letters, numbers and symbols, all of that should be in there. 96% of the most common passwords can be cracked in less than 1 second. I want you to digest that. That's 96% of every password that was surveyed, which was hundreds of thousands, if not millions, can be cracked within a matter of seconds. Now, we didn't specify whether that was a brute force attack or a rainbow table attack and different types of attacks that exist. But most of the time, people's passwords are just variations of already existing passwords. So if I was able to get your password once and you just added 1, 2 at the end, or you added a number sign, or you added an exclamation point, it would take me less than a minute to figure out what that new variation is, because most of us are human and most of us do not drastically change the password when we redo passwords. So uniqueness, we want different passwords per account, and we want to avoid common words that are used in our daily lives. So anything that you post on social media, anything that is posted on your business's website, anything that is common to you or unique to you that you have posted online that would possibly give us a hint as to what your password would be, is something we want to avoid. So in order to help us manage all of these passwords, password managers were created. And I think most of us know what a password manager is, but if you don't, it is basically a software that you can use within your business to help record all of the different passwords to all of your different accounts, and they're all stored in one location. So we're not writing our passwords on sticky notes. We're not writing them in Excel sheets. We're not writing them in a Word document or a notes app on our phone. we are using an encrypted third-party software in order to store them locally or in the cloud. Benefits to password managers are the enhanced security. So they're typically encrypted. Actually, they're all encrypted, and their job is to secure your passwords. Uh, it allows for autofill, so we don't ever need to actually know the password as long as we have the ability to autofill. It can, depending on your device or your password manager you choose, it can be synchronized across your devices, across your computers, across your accounts, and they regularly update themselves in order to make sure that they have the latest and greatest encryptions that are protecting you. So when we talk about multi-factor authentication, which then we morph out of the password managers and into, we have a password manager that protects our passwords. We need an additional layer of security, which is that thing that we are. So typically with when we create multi-factor authentication, there's three key messages here. We have the knowledge factor, which is basically something that you know, which is your password usually. Then you have your possession factor, which is something you have, and that is typically a physical token, that is a smart card, that is a security key, that is a one-time password generated by authentication app like the code or your text messages. And then we have something that you are, which is your inherence factor, which is your face, which is your fingerprint, which is retina scans. These are all forms, all of these forms work together to create multi-factor authentication. And you're probably familiar with it being called two-factor authentication because that's the most common thing that we use. But in essence, we actually consider it multi-factor authentication because we can use any combination. It's just you have been probably as small businesses more familiar with people labeling it as two-factor authentication because you have your password and then something else. Whereas true multi-factor authentication uses all of them. So here are different types of multi-factor authentications that you can use. SMS-based MFA, which is your codes that you get sent from Microsoft or wherever you're using, and you use that to log into your phone. App-based multi-factor authentication, which is Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, LastPass Authenticator. 1Password has their own. There's hundreds of them that exist, and they all serve the same function, which is to provide you with temporary codes. Biometric MFA, that's your fingerprint readers, your retina scanners, your Face ID, all of that. And then when I talked about hardware tokens, this is a form that we don't necessarily use anymore because of the fact that app-based MFA was created. But in the past and in more secure locations, we do use what we call a hardware token, which does the same purpose as an app-based multi-factor authentication, except for it's a physical device, and that has to be linked to somebody. So you can't easily get somebody's phone or something like that and see all of them. It's very unique to the device that it is linked to. So some samples for multi-factor authentication. Most of your websites, most of your softwares that you use as small businesses will have the ability to turn on what they call two-step authentication, two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, all meaning the same thing. So two common things that I get asked are for Google and Facebook. Google has their version, which you can click on this link, and I have it so when you get the slides, you can do it. If you have a Google account, a Gmail account, whatever it is, you click on this link, you go into your security panel, you turn on two-step authentication, and then you go through the process to set it up. You can use text messages with a phone. You can use their Google Authenticator app. You can use any other third-party authenticator app. You can use really, you can use your email as well, but we don't recommend using email because if they got access to your email, they could theoretically then just get all the codes that they would need because they don't need you then at that point. Facebook has the same concept. So here are the steps that you would go through in order to get two-factor authentication turned on your Facebook account, which also is really any Meta device, so Instagram as well. Some password resources for you. So these are some articles that you can go out and look at from NIST, CISA. Um, we have some from the General Cybersecurity Alliance. So these are great resources to use with you or your employees or just in general to have some basic knowledge. And then for password management or password managers, we have the Bitwarden, we have Keeper, we have 1Password, we have Dashlane. Um, we don't I can't tell you which one's better than the other. They all work relatively the same. Common question I get asked is the one that if you're using Google Chrome or you're using Apple, so you're using Safari, are those as good as these third-party clients? And in most cases, they are, except for usually if you use Google Chrome or you use Apple's specific, what do they call it, Keeper. Um, the only disadvantage with those is they're local to those actual softwares. So like Google, you have to have the Google browser on all of your devices in order for it to sync and to use it. If you have all Apple devices, then you're fine, but you will never be able to use a third. Actually, not never, because I did just see that Windows does have a Apple Keychain version that you can download on your Windows machine to use your iCloud password. So you theoretically could do that, but it's not as native to Windows. So these third parties like Bitwarden, Keeper, 1Password, Dashlane, there's hundreds of them, hundreds others. They work across platforms, so it doesn't matter what your operating system is for phones, tablets, anything like that. All right. So moving on to antivirus. Do we need antivirus? What is antivirus? So antivirus is basically the software that you install on your devices to make sure that there are no malicious viruses or anything that are on your devices. So malware is something that we use for a lot of reasons, and that is to make sure that we are protected even when we don't know if there's something on our system. I will just have a spoiler alert here. Macs are just as susceptible as Windows machines. I've been doing this for the last 6 or 7 years, and I often get the question, do I need antivirus software if I have a Mac because I heard that they were more secure? Maybe in the past that was true. It is not true anymore. The reason why Apple was deemed as more secure and viruses didn't happen to get on Apple devices is because at the time, 90% of the business network or business computing was done on Windows machines. So if I was an attacker, I wouldn't even bother trying to write viruses for Macs because they weren't a large target for me. Now we're looking at more 50-50 on Apple and Windows devices throughout the business. So now it's a hit or miss on what I'm going to write a malicious code for. And now we have cross functions. So we have AI to automatically write us code that will work on both Apple devices and Windows devices. So anyway, long-winded answer to say you need an antivirus on any operating system, regardless of what you've got. So choosing the right antivirus software. We want to make sure that it's comprehensive and in protection. We want to make sure that it works on all of your devices. You don't want to pay for one antivirus that only works on a Windows machine when you've got Apple devices, you've got tablets, you've got all these other things that then you would have to have multiple subscriptions. So you want to make sure it's comprehensive. You want to make sure that it's easy to use. You don't want something slowing down and then going into performance impact. We don't want something that's going to slow down your computer. I know Norton was famous for slowing down your computer, and even though it was a relatively robust product, people stopped using it because it was a software that really, when it was doing its scans, really slowed down your computers. So we want to make sure that it doesn't impact our performance. We want to make sure that there's support to it. So if it catches a virus or we don't know how something worked or we don't know how to quarantine something or there's something that we're having issues with, that we can actually call the representative or call the customer support line for those different antivirus softwares that exist and get actual people to help us. And then compare functionality. You want to make sure that it is protecting what you need it to protect. There are different forms of antivirus out there. There are relatively simple antivirus softwares that only do one thing, which is scan your computer for known viruses. Then we have other viruses, other antivirus software out there that is a little bit more uh, proactive and actually knows what could be coming or learns your habits on what you do on the computer. And if it detects that habits are out of the ordinary, then it will say, you know what, you're doing something that you normally never do. Let me quarantine this action to make sure that you actually are doing what it is that's happening. So best practices for using antivirus software, we want to make sure that we're regularly updating and or patching our antivirus software. Most antivirus software is only good as the last update that it had, because most antiviruses work off of basically just comparing what it knows is a virus with what is on your machine. So an update refreshes its basically table of contents and refreshes how many viruses it knows about. So that way it makes sure that it catches viruses that may be on your system. If you've ever heard the term zero-day viruses or zero-day attacks or things like that, that is when a virus has its first time ever being recognized and seen on a system. So we don't know what it is. It's zero-day attack. It is something that brand new, and we don't know how to fix it or combat against it. So zero-day attacks, antivirus isn't really good at unless you have those advanced antivirus softwares or threat detection softwares that kind of look at people's attributions and how they're working and living on the machines and finding those out of normal stuff. Scheduled scans. We want to make sure that we're scheduling them to outside of our business's hours, so that way scans are not slowing down our performance and impacting our businesses. Complying with our security measures, we want to make sure that it is not contradicting what we want in a security measure, and we want to make sure that it's monitoring and managing our systems at all time. So here's some different articles and things that you can go out and read about antivirus and ransomware. Ransomware is very big in the news right now. So ransomware specifically is a form of virus that encrypts all of your information on your computers, so that way you cannot basically read anything without paying a ransom. So ransomware is one of the most common forms of viruses that we see, but it is not the only one. So some software that exists out there that I did some Googling around to determine whether they had a good small business antivirus software. One is CrowdStrike, Bitdefender, Norton Small Business, and Trend Micro. There's others out there. I'm not saying one is better than the other, just because I know that's also a statement that will probably be made is I have CrowdStrike on this page. If anyone remembers the world burning in July from a CrowdStrike issue, that was basically an update was pushed to anyone who had a CrowdStrike software and ultimately crashed every computer that update was updated to. It wasn't a malicious attack. It wasn't someone who hacked in and created a bad update and then sent it out to everyone. It was a flaw in CrowdStrike's ability to manage how they pushed out updates. So it should have gone through various iterations of what this update does to a system prior to being a actual ready to push out update for every person who uses it. So was CrowdStrike in the wrong? 100%. They should have never pushed an update and it should have never gotten through the iteration process of knowing if it was a good update. However, I do not blame CrowdStrike 100% on this. We need to make sure that we test all of our updates, especially if we're a business. We can't just blindly trust every update, especially for a larger business that exists from our third-party vendors. And so I do also blame some of the larger agencies like our airlines and our banks who use these types of third-party vendors. They should have a testing environment to test how the update works in their environment or their systems prior to just blindly pushing it out, because vendors do make mistakes. They don't know how your network works in a nutshell, because they're pushing out updates to their systems to work across however many people that they have clients. So we have to make sure that we're testing them. So CrowdStrike, there was a problem on both ends on that one. So CrowdStrike is still a great actual software. So with that being said, that's kind of it on the different types of things that I wanted to cover today. So I wanted to leave time for questions, comments, concerns. What are your small businesses seeing? If you have any questions, I'm here to help. If not, that is it from me.
Right.